Last week we looked at the flood, mostly from a scientific point of view, and we looked at two questions. Did the water really cover the whole earth? And then, where did all the water come from? It seems to me that the physical evidence for the global flood is pretty convincing. So today we're going to look at what happened next. I'm pretty sure that we all remember the story of Noah sending out the dove after the water subsided. The first time the dove returned with nothing, indicating there was still nowhere for her to rest on the land. Our reading picks up on the second trip by the dove, and she brings back a fresh olive shoot, promising signs there. And the next time he released the dove, she did not return. And Noah knew that the dove had found a home, and that meant that the waters were receding. So finally, after being on the ark for a total of 371 days, or exactly 53 weeks, God tells Noah that it's time to leave the ark. So he and his family and all the creatures that were in the ark walked down out of the ark onto dry land. Okay, so we're going to have a think about that today. All right, let's think back a bit to Adam and Eve. When they were brought to life, what did they see all around them? I think that they saw paradise. The Garden of Eden, all set up for them to live and to be well looked after food-wise. The temperature was always comfortable. It never rained. And even though they didn't wear clothes, the temperature was comfortable and constant. And even better, they didn't get sunburn. They were surrounded by a wonderful animal population. All of them were vegetarians, the animals and the humans. Truly, this was paradise. And of course, God walked and talked with them in the garden. After the fall, things did change, didn't they? People started to wear clothes because the concept of shame was part of the package that humans won from the devil. They had to work hard for their food. They domesticated animals, cattle, sheep and goats for milk and fibre. Both humans and animals were still vegetarian. And of course, the number of people grew, so too did the depths of the sinful human nature. There were murders and all sorts of depravity going on. That was the world that existed before the flood. That was the world that Noah and his family knew. A green and lush world with animals and people all around them and all the noises that go along with that. And then came the appointed day. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife, and his sons' wives with him. Every animal, every creeping thing, every bird, and whatever creeps on the earth according to their families, went out of the ark. So what I'd like to do here is try and paint a picture in our minds as to how the family's life had now changed. When they looked out on the landscape, did they see a luxurious garden with everything that they needed to live? Not at all. They would have a view across the landscape of total and utter devastation. Very few trees standing at all, and almost certainly with no foliage, let alone fruit. There may have been a fresh pick of grass or small plants for the animals, but not much else. It would have been a silent world. Until they released the animals, there were no birds singing. Or animal noises, cattle mooing, that sort of stuff. No villages full of people going about their lives. They were totally and utterly alone in a landscape that might as well have been the moon, so far as they were concerned. They had survived the flood, but they were alone. The future of the human race depended upon those 8 individuals. Well, maybe not 8 of them. Noah was now 601 years old. Let's give him a break. The whole be fruitful and multiply thing was probably aimed at the three younger couples, I think. So they lifted their eyes and immediately it's, uh-oh, what are those white fluffy things up there in the sky? The last time we saw them, it was the end of the world. Is it going to happen again? Then they feel a cool breeze on their skin. What's this? They'd never felt wind before. They'd never felt cold before. It's a whole different world out there. And after a few days, they will get sunburned. There's no protective barrier against the harmful radiation from space anymore. This same radiation would soon degrade their genetics and lead to a shortening of their lives. The families were now living in a world that was hostile to them. They had no one to help them get set up. They either figured out how to live in this environment or they died. Pretty simple, isn't it? So what do you do in that situation? Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird, and he offered burnt offerings on the altar. When faced with the impossible, what do? You worship. You worship. You give thanks for being chosen to survive the flood. And Noah chose to worship without thinking about the cost of the finest of their livestock. He built the very first altar that we see recorded in the Bible, and he offered the best and a costly sacrifice to God and to thank him for their survival. God's response to this act of devotion was astonishing. Let's read it. And the Lord smelled a soothing aroma, and then the Lord said, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of a man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Remember, before Noah built the ark, the scripture recorded the words of God. Chapter 6, verse 5, Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So despite all of this, and despite knowing that nothing would change the heart of a people who were determined to do evil, God chose in his grace and great mercy to allow his plan. Remember, it's plan A. There is no plan B. This is plan A. He chose to allow his plan to work its way out now. From the descendants of Noah, specifically from his son Shem, would come the promised Redeemer who would set everything right again. God makes a promise. He says, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. But wait, there's more. God builds on this promise with covenant to creation. A series of promises governing the cycles of the earth that we as people all over the world have depended and relied upon for life itself. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. Firstly, God makes a promise that applies so long as the earth remains. So that means that these promises apply to us as well. Okay, so That really came up really well, didn't it? Okay. Before the flood, the earth was standing up straight, perpendicular. Okay? After the flood, the earth's axis is tilted 23.5 degrees. Okay? And all that shifting of the waters and the silt and the debris of the flood and the violence of that whole thing had caused a tilt in the earth's axis. Let's try that one. Okay. So that's how the seasons were created. So you see at the top there, where the North Pole is, that's the furthest point away from the sun. So that's the North Pole of winter. And at the bottom, you see at the South Pole there, that's the southern summer. And you see around the equator, it's always just plain hot. Okay? It's always just plain hot in the tropics. So the Earth maintains that axis as it goes around the sun. So on one side of the sun, it's the northern summer and the southern winter. As it goes around through autumn and spring, you have the northern winter and the southern summer, because the Earth keeps that axis going all the way around. He promised us seed time and harvest for as long as the earth remains. Cold and heat. No one had ever been cold before. No one had ever been hot before. No one had ever seen snow. But those cycles of winter and summer were with us now until the world ends. No one had ever seen drought either. All that shifting of the waters had resulted in that tilt. And what that does is cause differences in temperature. So when the sea is being warmed in one place and cooled in another, you have evaporation and you have winds. And the winds carry the evaporation over the land and it drops as rain on the land through the rivers back to the sea again. That's the rain cycle that we know. These are the engines that drive our climate. It would give us the seasons so that we would know when to plant and when to harvest. It would also lead to the polar ice caps forming, and then to a great ice age that would cover most of the northern hemisphere, once again wiping out many of the species of animals that were unable to adapt to the extreme cold. And the final part of this story is where God blesses Noah. And he gives them, Noah and his family, the same commission that he gave Adam. And he made some serious changes to their diets, however. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read the bit that we didn't read. Okay? So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast on the earth, on every bird of the air, and all that move on the earth, and on all the fish of the sea. They shall be given into your hand. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. I have given you all things, even as the green herbs. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is its blood." Okay, so all of a sudden they're allowed to eat meat. They're allowed to kill and eat the animals, every kind of animal. We don't have clean and unclean yet. All right? "Surely for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast I will require it, and from the hand of man. From the hand of every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man. And as for you, be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it. There's a few sobering commands there, isn't there? They weren't suggestions, were they? They weren't suggestions. There's capital punishment there for a start. Okay? There's the whole idea of life being in the blood. So we need to make sure that animals are killed humanely and, the meat prepared properly. So the last part is where God now establishes a covenant with Noah and his descendants. I've told you about covenants a few weeks ago. A covenant is an agreement between two parties for life, usually bonded with blood, right? Snip, snip, blood to blood, right? And in this case, it's a covenant between a greater and a lesser party. And covenants are based on the idea, if you will, I will. Okay? If you will do this, if you will grow crops for me and my family, we will provide you with protection from your enemies, right? And we'll make sure that everything is okay. So you just feed us and we will take care of you. All right? So that's the idea of covenant. Then God spoke to Noah and his sons with him, saying, As for me, behold, I will establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you. And every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that go out of the ark, every beast of the earth. Thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you, and every living creature that is with you, for perpetual generations. That's forever. That's us. I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant which is between me and you, and every living creature of all flesh. The waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow shall be in the cloud, and I will look on to it. Remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, This is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. Okay, so now here's an interesting thing. A covenant is usually if you will, I will, right? But this one isn't, is it? God says, I will. I know you're all evil. I know you're all going to do the wrong thing. Nevertheless, I'm going to bless you, right? This is my covenant with you. No matter what goes on, I will bless you. I will look after you. This is the way it's going to be. I'm not going to wipe the earth out again. Not by water anyway. So if we learn anything from the flood account, it's that God is very serious when he talks about judgment and an accounting for sin. In the time of Noah, it was with a catastrophic worldwide flood that wiped out every human being alive on the planet at that time, except for those in the ark. We know that the scriptures tell us about another judgment to come. And I'm going to close with this pretty much. Peter describes it very graphically in 2 Peter chapter 3. The world that then existed was deluged with water and perished. But by the same word, the heavens and earth that now exist are stored up for fire, being kept until the day of judgment and destruction of the ungodly. Friends, this is a pretty sober warning. All right? There is going to come another day of judgment for the whole earth, and it's going to be a judgment of fire, not a flood. So don't leave here today if you're not sure that you're saved and in a right relationship with God. If you want to talk about that, come and see me after the service, okay? Amen. Amen.